Page 4 and 5, Understanding Checks and Balances. A Balancing Act. After Lincoln, on April 15, 1865, Andrew Johnson was sworn in as President of the United States. After Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, Johnson led the country through a challenging period known as Reconstruction. The Civil War was over, but the nation had to be rebuilt. There were many questions that the government needed to answer. How would the Southern states be treated? What would happen to the freed slaves? Johnson was a Southern Democrat. The Republican held Congress assumed he would go easy on the South, and they were right. He certainly tried. He started reconstructing the South and let the states rejoin the Union with few consequences. He even allowed the Southern states to limit the rights of freed slaves. Featured in the caption here, the 5th Regiment Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry was one of the first official African American fighting units in the United States. Nicknamed the Swamp Angels, they fought alongside the Union Army during the Civil War. Impeached. Many in Congress disagreed with Johnson's stance. When they came back to session, they passed bills to overturn the president's actions. Yet every time these bills were sent to Johnson, he would veto them and send them back to Congress. Congress would then get enough votes to override the presidential vetoes and pass the bills anyway. In 1867, Congress felt Johnson had crossed the line by abusing his executive powers and wanted to impeach him. The House of Representatives voted against Johnson, but the Senate narrowly voted to acquit him. His presidency was saved by one vote. Featured in this photograph, Andrew Johnson was allowed to stay in office to finish out his term. After Andrew Johnson served as president, he returned to Washington, D.C. in 1875 to represent his state of Tennessee as a senator. He died only a few months into his Senate term. Page 6 and 7. Three branches of government. The United States federal government is divided into three separate branches: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. The state and local branches are divided in the same way too. Each of the three branches has its own responsibilities and powers. Each branch also has the authority to make sure that the other branches do not abuse their powers. The way the system is set up, if one branch fulfills a responsibility, then another branch must check that action by approving it or vetoing it. This is how power stays balanced in the government. This system of checks and balances prevents one branch of government from becoming too powerful. To get anything done in the U.S. federal government, at least two branches must work together. The three branches of government: legislative makes laws, executive carries out laws, judicial evaluates laws. Building the branches. The legislative branch is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. The executive branch is made up of the President, Vice President, and Cabinet. The judicial branch is made up of the Supreme Court and federal courts. Fast fact: checks and balances act like a scale. When one branch tries to take more power and tip the scale in its direction, another branch will use its powers of checks and balance to balance the scale again. No kings. The U.S. government was set up so that no branch could seize complete power over the country, to prevent a president from ruling like a king. Congress has the right to override vetoes and even remove the president from office after an impeachment trial. These are just two examples of the many checks and balances set out in the U.S. Constitution. Featured here, the U.S. Congress. The U.S. Congress is made up of the Senate and the House of Representatives. It is located in the Capitol Building in Washington, D.C. Page 8 and page 9. The Constitutional Convention. James Madison is often considered the father of the Constitution. He came up with many of the ideas for how the government would be formed and organized during the Constitutional Convention in 1787. Madison wrote the Virginia Plan, upon which much of the Constitution was based. This plan called for three separate branches: a two-house legislature, an executive, and a judiciary. Madison featured here. The caption reads, Madison used the ideas of many great political philosophers as inspiration. He adapted the ideas of these great thinkers into something he thought would work for his new American Republic. Separation of powers. The final Constitution designed a form of government that would have an intricate set of checks and balances and separation of powers. These features made the American system a democratic republic that was not only unique but also long-lasting. It prevented one person or group of people from taking control of the government. As James Madison explained in the Federalist Papers, number 19, the accumulation of all powers in the same hands is the very definition of tyranny. Locke and Montesquieu. Madison was inspired by thinkers such as English philosopher John Locke and French philosopher Baron de Montesquieu. When both wrote about the importance of separation of powers, Locke insisted that legislative and executive powers should be separate from each other. Montesquieu took the idea a step further by stating that the powers should include three separate branches: legislative, executive, and judiciary. Page 10 and 11. Separate powers. The legislative branch. The legislative branch of government appears in all three levels: federal, state, and local governments. Federal legislative branch. At the federal level, the legislative branch is called Congress. The United States has a bicameral or two-house legislature. The lower house is the House of Representatives. The upper house is the Senate. The primary job of Congress is to make laws. It is the only branch that can impose tax, declare war, and approve treaties with other countries. Congress also has the power to impeach officials. Page 11, Fast Fact. The federal legislative branch doesn't just check the other branches. This branch also checks itself. One way this happens is during the lawmaking process. A bill can be proposed by either the House of Representatives or the Senate, but both houses must vote in favor of the bill or it doesn't move on to the executive branch. State legislative branch. At the state level, the legislative branch makes state laws, passes state taxes, and decides issues for the state. All of the states except Nebraska have a bicameral legislature. Nebraska has a one-house legislature. In many states, the legislature may be called the General Assembly, General Court, or the Legislative Assembly. Local legislative branch. Every state is divided into smaller areas called counties, boroughs, or parishes. These areas are then divided into cities and towns. Local legislative branches include county boards of commissioners, police juries, and city councils. Counties and cities can pass ordinances or laws and can tax their residents.